Now, all that is alarming enough. Think, I mean, more than 10 million Australians alone use Facebook, and its influence is huge, and too often it's hidden, the way it manipulates. And now Facebook wants to use that influence it has to police your thought on global warming. It says it's going to debunk what it decides, what it alone decides, with its pet experts, what it decides. Facebook decides are myths about climate change by slapping notices on posts it doesn't like, telling people to go to its climate change information hub for what it claims are the facts. Now, already I'm thinking, how does this work? Does this work both ways? I mean, has Facebook ever contradicted this kind of misinformation from global warming alarmists?
Even the rain that falls isn't actually going to fill our dams and our river system.
Never corrected that? Well, has Facebook ever contradicted this kind of misinformation by global warming alarmists?
People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
Any correction to that? No, because Facebook seems much more concerned to push exactly that kind of alarmism and to attack skeptics who call it out. Now, I say that because Facebook's new climate police started this supposed new fact check of climate untruths with this propaganda as an example about polar bears, which seems to be a popular untruth pushed by alarmists. It claimed, this is Facebook's own claim, it says, polar bears are falling in number, and it's because of global warming. In fact, it seems the opposite is true. There were about 10,000 polar bears at most in 1973 when all the polar countries agreed to stop unrestricted hunting of polar bears. I wonder how many polar bears there are now. To answer that, I talked earlier to Patrick Moore. Now, he was one of the people who founded Greenpeace. He later led Greenpeace Canada. For 15 years, he was at the top of what was then probably the most radical green movement on the planet. And eventually, big one, eventually he left Greenpeace and started to call out green scares. And just the other day, he came out with this latest book called Fake Invisible Catastrophes and Threats of Doom. Patrick Moore, thank you so much indeed for joining me again after so many years. Facebook has kicked off its new climate change fact-checking campaign with this claim. Overall, polar bear populations are declining because of global warming. Your new book has a whole chapter on polar bears. Is that claim by Facebook true?
It's absolutely false. There's simply no doubt about it, and I just don't understand where they get these fact checkers. They're a bunch of posers who really don't have much deep knowledge of this subject, the climate subject or the polar bear subject, which is, of course, blamed on CO2 and climate. Here's the story of polar bears in a nutshell. In 1973, when I was just beginning in Greenpeace back in the day, wildlife biologists realized the polar bear was declining in population due to overhunting. It had become very easy to get up there in a plane, hire an Inuit guide, and get a big rug or two for your fireplace. So they warned the nations around the Arctic that this was happening, and in 1973, all Arctic nations signed a treaty to end unrestricted, and I mean it was unrestricted hunting, in the Arctic for polar bears. Hardly anybody has heard of that treaty because the media and the political left doesn't want them to know about that treaty, because that's what saved the polar bears. Polar bears are a conservation success story, one of the best of the last century. They have quadrupled in population from 8,000 or so to a median average of 38,000 bears today. And the Inuit people who live in Nunavut, which is the Canadian territory where there are no trees and lots of polar bears, have had to pass a polar bear management plan in order to deal with the fact that the polar bear's population has exploded to the point where they're coming into their villages and harming and even killing their people.
So, Patrick Moore, what does this say? I mean, this is one of the, right off the bat, front up, you know, fact-checking things. We're going to slap this kind of thing over anything that mentions, I guess, polar bears. What does it say to you about Facebook's climate change fact-checking campaign?
Well, it actually says a lot about the whole climate catastrophe, emergency, whatever they call it, situation, which is totally fabricated in the first place. But, you know, I did a little video in which I said, and this is a pretty well drawn quote, the climate has always been changing and it always will. They said that was misleading to say that. It's not misleading. The climate's been changing ever since the Earth was created. And it continues to change. And nothing that is happening in this global climate today is anywhere near out of the ordinary with the last 10,000 years of this interglacial period called the Holocene that we're in now, where humans began agriculture way back 10, 12,000 years ago. The beginning of human civilization came with this interglacial period, and the temperature and the weather in this interglacial period has been a lot more extreme at times than it is today. This is a relatively benign time for the modern era of climate and weather.
Now, in the in the coronavirus crisis, you've been marooned in your town on Vancouver Island. You've written your book, a new book, Fake Invisible Catastrophes and Threats of Doom. Love the title. Why did you choose that?
I chose that title because I think I have a unique thesis here. Most of the scare stories, in fact, I think pretty well all of them, are actually based on things that are either invisible, like carbon dioxide and radiation, or so remote, or in the future, which is definitely so remote, that nobody can see it for themselves. Observation and verification of that observation is the basis of science. If the general public can't verify how many polar bears there are, or whether the Great Barrier Reef and other coral reefs are healthy or not, then they depend on the activists, the media, the politicians, and the scientists on serial government grants for their information. And all of those people have huge skin in the game. They're making their living from this, and multiple billions of dollars are involved, and they want us to believe their scare stories. Because if it wasn't scary, it wouldn't get in the newspaper. It wouldn't be the talk du jour. It wouldn't cause Green New Deals and windmills and solar farms that fail and cause blackouts now in many jurisdictions around the world. So, and then when you get into the renewable energy side, you're into trillions of dollars in the end if we continue with that. Hopefully it is self-correcting, because once these blackouts start, people will understand why they're happening, and maybe they will take away the subsidies, mandates, and tax credits that is the only reason these two technologies, wind and solar, are possible.
I don't know, Patrick Moore, sometimes you strike me as an incorrigible optimist, because I just wonder whether facts make any difference whatsoever. You can say polar bears aren't declining, it doesn't matter, you're yelled down. You can say the evidence is there. Paul Kench's research, for instance, Pacific Islands are not sinking, most are growing or stable. And you can't say, oh, listen, we're actually getting fewer cyclones, particularly here in Australia. And you can't say, but listen, food crops, grain crops have in fact been setting records around the world. You can't say that, because then you're a skeptic. You seem bad. I just wonder whether people are fact allergic here.
Well, my reason for my optimism is partly because I know that when the pendulum swings too far to one side, it tends to come back again at a certain point when people realize it has gone too far. I am an optimistic person, though, and hope that people will realize that they are having the wool pulled over their eyes on these many subjects, whether it's nuclear energy. You know, last time I was in Australia was on a nuclear energy tour, because it seemed to me that maybe Australia could do something useful with all that uranium it has, instead of shipping it all overseas to countries that want it. And then, so Australia has all this uranium but won't allow nuclear energy. Slovakia in Eastern Europe has 2/3 of its electricity from nuclear energy and will not allow uranium mining. Now, that is how rational politics is in this world today.
Patrick Moore, I can only hope that your book, Fake Invisible Catastrophes and Threats of Doom, will redress the balance and give reason a platform. Thank you so much indeed for your time.
It's wonderful being with you, and it's on Amazon in all countries in the world, I think. And it will give you a whole new appreciation of these scare stories just being fake in the final analysis.